This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Hail and well met.
What are we talking about today, Puka?
We're going back in time to another age, a dark age, if you will.
Yeah, the 1990s.
Oh, that hallowed era. And not only are we going back in time, we are also crossing game lines because we're talking about vampire today. I mean, kind of. We're talking about the Fae in the context of Vampire Dark Ages. But not Dark Ages Vampire. Totally different.
Well, no, not totally different. But prepare to be confused about editions.
Yeah.
So they had Vampire the Dark Ages, which was the first edition of it using the second edition rules.
Yes.
And then the second edition was Dark Ages Vampire using the revised edition rules. And then they came out with Vampire the Dark Ages 20th Anniversary Edition using the 20th Anniversary Edition rules.
Not confusing at all.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit confusing.
Yep. And there's the Dark Ages Fae, which we've mentioned before. This, despite arguably being the same game line, as different talking about the Fae. Very different from Dark Ages Fae.
The other thing is that even though it was the first edition of Dark Ages using the second edition of Vampire the Masquerade rules, it was released contemporaneous with Changeling the Dreaming, first edition.
Boy, it was published in 1998.
So that was actually a reprinting. The initial book was published in 96.
Oh, that explains my confusion. Because my physical copy is 1998.
Yeah,
and is a dedication to C.S. Lewis for some reason. So,
well, yeah, noted vampire of the Dark Ages, C.S. Lewis.
He did a lot of Vampire and Dark Ages stuff. So,
yeah. And then the companion came out in May 97, so a little bit closer to second edition. But
yep.
I suppose one might ask, what does this have to do with changelings? But
yeah, some things.
Some. Well, for context too, I think we've talked before about how pre-changeling or like early changeling era World of Darkness materials tended to emphasize the don't mess with the Fae angle without going into much detail because not a lot of detail existed yet. And although this book was released after Changeling the Dreaming, like no doubt it was in development before that, and it does retain some of that idea.
Yep.
So
and some confusing details.
Yeah. Like you can tell that the two books are probably in development at roughly the same time.
So shall we dive in with Fae things? We're going to talk about some other things too that are related that could be useful in a changeling context, but
yeah.
Let's start with what it says first about the Fae or the fairy.
Yes. So returning to page 259, the fairies. They are known by many names: the fair folk, the wild ones, the mad ones.
Mm-hmm.
And we get some types of Fae. And it's worth saying that if you are looking through this book, almost everything will kind of be related back to vampires. So with the Sidhe, it's like the noble Sidhe are considered to be the ruling class of the Fae, much as the Ventrue and La Sombra are among Cainites. So if you don't play vampire, you might be like, who? The what?
Mm-hmm.
So bear that in mind.
They're like the Sidhe, but vampires.
Are they though? I guess maybe a little, yeah.
Character concepts, I'd say a lot of Ventrue and La Sombra character concepts map on. If you were sort of remaking the character as a changeling, you'd probably do them as a Sidhe.
Social function-wise, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the Sidhe are presented as the ruling class, the Arcadian-based ones with a beauty so intense it is nearly alien.
Mm-hmm.
I like the little Toreador note about, the Toreador was so awestruck by the sight of the Sidhe that they burned out their own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get nymphs and forest fairies. And here you can see that the way they're presented, the nymphs are already well on their way to becoming full-on in anime.
Yep.
I don't know how I feel about that.
And then we get household fairies, which some of these names might be fun, of equating brownies, boggarts, gremlins, and puka.
Buka,
sorry.
Yeah, it's confusing because they have the buka here and then the puka coming up later. But Yeah, interesting to see like brownies who are basically boggans and boggarts and gremlins like all in the same category.
Mm-hmm. Then we
But
get tricksters. I mean, if you think of all this as just a vampire who's somewhat knowledgeable about the Fae, but like definitely doesn't know everything, was like writing
yeah.
it down. That's sort of where I'd put a lot of this.
And outside of the text, possibly an author who is handed a draft copy or an outline for the upcoming
Hmm.
or recently released Changeling the Dreaming.
Yep.
And then changelings are presented as a separate sort of tranche of the Fae. So here we do have some of the Dark Ages Fae structure of like early changelings coexisting with full Fae. And I like the idea that
Mhm.
slipped in here that some of them might have started becoming changelings as like this necessary method of rebirth to avoid stasis in their existence.
Although, if you read something later here, we'll get into that. There says something here that doesn't really fit with that, but we'll get into it.
Oh. Well, and
Yeah.
then there's also the tithe to hell possibility.
Yeah. And they talk about the unseelie court, the evil Fae, as opposed to the Seelie court that are just dangerous.
Yeah. They really lean into that both in this and the companion that we're going to talk about
Hmm.
momentarily. Like Unseelie really is evil here.
Yep.
But that's a vampire thing. I mean, vampire has always if they're going to have an alliance at all, it's going to be with the Unseelie.
Hmm. Well, no, but they make it seem like you want to stay away from the unseelie. Seelie, you could have some dealings with.
It's true. So
Mm.
then some customs. And these are all, I mean, this is like an antagonist chapter, so it does fly through these pretty quickly, but there's a meaty chunk at the end that we're getting to. So,
Yep.
um, but the customs include glamour, and it has some of the definition that we get in Changeling about it being, you know, the creative energy and magic and the dream stuff with which the Fae can create wonders, naturally represented by the discipline of chemistry. I
Yep.
don't know that I would really call this a custom, but
No, that's a strange. Yeah, and they're sort of conflating a bunch of different things with glamour. Some of which
yeah,
angels would say is glamour, some would
illusion.
say, yeah. And then possession, which is not about possessing people like I thought at first, and it's about a interesting thing I've never seen anything described in Changeling or Dark Ages
Yeah,
about ownership customs. But
I love this though.
yep,
Like the idea that the notion of possessing an object is like inalienable for them, but very alienable for others. So,
yep.
but then with the exception of artwork, I'm like, oh, that's so cool.
Yep.
Really love that. Unrelated, I don't know how high quality your copy is. I'm looking off a PDF right now because I'm not in my apartment and I'm not at my bookshelf. Page 261, we have a little changeling style sidebar about piercing the glamour using the discipline of auspex to see through their illusions. What is the icon on the upper left there?
At the upper left icon
Because it's
is,
not the issue compass, I don't think. It looks like a cross between that and chicanery or something.
okay, here we go. Yeah, it looks like an issue.
Okay. It's just really poor quality on here. So,
Hmm. Oh yeah, no, mine's it's much better grayscale on my print copy. Although this is not a print on demand, this was like the second printing or something.
mm,
As an aside, this is one of the best physical book holdups that I've had from this era.
nice. I do remember it being quite robust.
Hmm.
Anyway, yes, I love this idea. I like the idea of there being a motley of like super communist fae who don't believe in property but are hell bent on liberating artwork from people who
Hmm.
have like bought it unjustly from artists. Super into that.
But I think it's also trying to go for like an alien mindset of
Yeah, I guess so. I feel like it's dependent on language almost. I feel like certain languages you can distinguish possession of objects in ways that are more finely grained than
yeah.
you get in
But it
English.
would be like they could take your shirt that you're wearing and be like, "Why? Whatever, it's fine."
Or your pronouns per that meme.
Yep.
Anyway, fairy places.
Hmm.
So I guess there's not really a need for freeholds around this time because it's pre-shattering, and
They do talk about freeholds in the other book, but
later on they do, but
yeah.
it seems like glades or fairy forests, as they point out here, are common enough that Fae are content to hang out in those pretty much.
Yep. And then it gets a little bit of vampires in the Fae, and it's just kind of.
Yeah, the usual.
Though it does list the Liahan Shi,
Right. Not spelled the same as House Leonin, but
but that's fine. I mean, It's a little bit anachronistic to have standardized spelling in this book at all. So,
Yeah, no, I'll take it. Yeah, the Fae are supposed to be enigmatic and mysterious with confusing motives,
mhm.
but also points out, maybe appropriately, that having them be a recurrent feature of a game would make it rather more high fantasy than dark medieval, because this is a dark medieval
Yep.
setting book.
But says maybe you want to do that.
Yeah. I want to also, just as a brief aside, in the sort of storytelling advice and setting advice for this book. So the original Dark Ages is set in 1197. We've seen that with the revision later, it's set in 1230, and then with Darkening Sky, 1242. So you do have some meta plot advancement along the way.
Hmm.
And when this book came out, I think that because you had books like A World Lit Only by Fire, which thankfully was not included in the references list, but was very much part of the pop culture zeitgeist at the time. And that idea of dark medieval as a mood, it's like it's not meant to be historically accurate,
Hmm.
even if it's nice when it works out that way. And it's a vampire. So the themes that play into that are like survival and espionage and power and identity, all of which could work for
Yeah.
Fae too, but it's a rather different feel.
I do wish they had gone with like 6th century as the
Yeah.
setting or something, or 8th century even, like, because then it would be a bit closer to that in Northern Europe. But
Yeah. Probably just not enough research, honestly.
yeah.
You can't get knights with plate armor or whatever.
Mm. So you still wouldn't really have them at this point, would you? I think it depends what you mean by plate armor, if it would count or not at this point.
Regardless, though, I mean, whether it's 6th century or 12th century or 13th,
Hmm.
it's pre-shattering, and the details on what the culture of the Fae was like, what the lifestyles of the Fae were like before that, at this point in the
Hmm.
evolution of the books, was still quite unclear, aside from they operated differently than in modern times.
Yep. Although there's definitely a lot of connections. Like there's the Kiths, basically.
Yeah, oh yeah, of course.
And speaking of Kiths, we have some sample Fae.
We do. 3 of them, in fact.
Yeah. The She Warrior, Puka Trickster, and Brownie, which kind of seems like a
It's a boggin. It's
yeah,
just a boggin.
yep. And then a big sidebar on drinking blood, which is actually pretty similar to what we've seen in other vampire books and crossover stuff.
But fantastic. Like you have a ready-made D10 table here because there's 10
Hmm.
possibilities. Permission to just read these quickly.
Yep.
So the mechanics here are you get double blood points from drinking fairy blood, but when you do, you have to roll self-control or instinct. For anyone who doesn't play vampire, they have the virtues as traits, so that's what this is referring to. And the difficulty is 4 plus the number of blood points you've ingested to resist a hunger frenzy where you just want to drink until you can't drink anymore. Then you roll stamina at difficulty 8, and if you fail, you've got 10 convenient side effects listed here. So they are: the character begins to violently eject blood from the ears, eyes, nose, and mouth. All the blood consumed is lost, plus an additional 1 to 10 blood points. The character suffers violent hallucinations. These hallucinations last for approximately 10 minutes for every blood point ingested. The character becomes bound to the fairy in question. This has the same effects as a blood oath. For anyone who's unfamiliar with vampire, that's serious business. The character falls completely in love with the next person they see other than the fairy. The character immediately enters torpor. For vampire, that's a deep sleep for a long time. The character immediately gains 1 point of appearance but loses a point of perception. These effects are permanent. And I would say very few players would want to trade that the one for the other.
Oh wait, I'm used to LARPers. There we go. That's why.
Okay. The character gains all the effects of heightened senses, Auspex level 1, though these senses cannot be turned off. Increase the difficulty for any roll involving wits by 2. This effect lasts for 1 hour for each point of blood consumed. The character begins to glow with a golden light. This light has the same effect as sunlight to any others nearby, though the character is immune to the effects. Not great news for other vampires.
Yep.
The character will be overcome by emotion and breaks out into tears of blood every time he hears music. This effect lasts 1 night for each blood point consumed. And finally, the character can see through all fairy glamours. This allows a character to see fairies who are invisible and recognize them in their true form. The character had best keep his knowledge secret lest he anger the fairies. They do not take kindly to having their secrets revealed. This effect lasts 1 hour per blood point consumed. So I love this,
Hmm.
and I absolutely will use something like this the next time, if ever, I run a Vampire Changeling crossover.
Hmm. One other thing about these is they seem like kind of standard. I mean, they have disciplines because it's a vampire book instead of the thing, but they all get like abilities at 6. Like it seems like their ability cap is now
Yeah, yeah,
6
yeah.
instead of 5.
Well, Dark Ages, so because in the Dark Ages setting, you start one generation lower, it's possible to start as seventh generation
Hmm.
vampires and have traits go up to 6.
Okay.
So I assume that's why.
But it does feel like that's the like there's like a slight power. I was keep thinking like what would the true these are supposed to be true Fae. It's like these are in terms of what we're given, which isn't a lot of there's a lot of details we won't have. But like it seems like not that much more powerful than Changeling the Dreaming Changelings versus True Fae in the medieval period. But
That being said, you have the She Warrior who has Dex 5, Melee 5, Celerity 3. So
yeah, you can do that in
on top
Changeling the
of everything
Dreaming.
else. Yeah. And then we get the big old sidebar.
Hmm.
Changeling the Dreaming, the medieval age.
Yeah, this is for making Changeling characters using Changeling the Dreaming rules and then porting it to Dark Ages setting. I think is what they're going for.
Yeah, and it suggests that the true Fae remain out of reach of players,
Yeah.
which Dark Ages Fae then kind of undid.
But then it also has True Fae being immune to banality in here.
Right.
And then, but also we had the True Fae earlier. Those three things were supposed to be True Fae that we got earlier, like in the little example character things, sample Fae.
Are they? I guess
Yeah,
maybe.
I don't think, no, these are not changelings.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. Well, regardless, we have some notes about banality being nearly non existent, which
Yeah,
I don't really know how I feel about that.
nah,
I
I don't
mean,
like it.
yeah, like they certainly walked that back in Changeling,
Hmm.
but some of the systems include a Changeling that goes up to 10 banality returns to Arcadia rather than becoming undone.
Yep,
They get permanent banality for getting married or, or for spending 7 years as a mortal.
yep. I mean, this is also fitting into that whole, that was a very age focused theming thing. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do like the getting temporary banality for telling a lie or breaking an oath. And
mhm.
breaking an oath can also get you permanent banality. I kind of like that as a setting trope.
But also they heal 1 point of damage every hour for some reason.
Right?
What?
Super powerful.
Why? And there is this whole question of like, do they get seemings? Like the powers of their Fey self? Like they don't have any appearance. There's no like if you're a changeling and you see another changeling, there's no like equivalent to a chimerical reality. So you just don't see them, I think, is what it's saying.
Uh, they mention seemings,
Hmm.
where it says a character's seeming determines the age of the mortal who has been kidnapped and
Oh,
taken to
oh, sorry. No,
Arcadia.
I meant the other kind of seeming. The Fey man. Sorry.
Oh, oh. I would assume that they still see each other's. Yeah, they still see each other's Fey.
No, well, it says they don't though in the sidebar.
Where does it say
I
that?
think. Wait. Kith may still be chosen for the character, though will not affect the character much in the way of outward appearance. Instead of appearing to have actual horns, a satyr may have extremely hairy legs, while one of the she may have fine features and almond-shaped eyes. The storyteller may decide whether the Kith's birthrights and frailties apply. So these are almost like kinane in a way, in terms of how they're describing it.
Hmm. It's a one-page sidebar, so the finer details aren't included. I don't know.
Yep.
But if I were running this set of changes to the changeling system in this
Hmm.
setting, I would say, yeah, of course, if you're a changeling, you see other changelings' true selves.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about like with the Dark Ages thing and sort of like what would I do with that, and it's just the chimerical reality thing. Okay, it didn't exist then, but like, what does it? You'd still have like illusions and people being hidden and stuff. So I'm not quite sure what I want to do with that. But
Yeah. Glamour, at least, is stupid plentiful in
hmm.
this, which again, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I can live with the
And where do
cantrips
they
being
get it?
easier.
They don't really say, right?
They regain it in fairy forests, if nothing
Yeah.
else. It does say the difficulty for gaining glamour through any means should always be lowered by 2, which implies epiphanies.
Hmm.
So,
This is also based on one agent, first edition changeling
yeah.
things in here.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's like draw another bunk card. Um, it doesn't actually say that. It's just what it makes me think of.
Yep.
So, do we think though that this would feel more integrated into like the Mortal World and the other Dark Ages games more so than Dark Ages Fae?
Yeah.
Because Dark Ages Fae really feels separated.
Also more integrated into changeling the dreaming for sure.
Yeah, and I'm down with that.
Do we want to go to the so
Yeah,
the companion?
the other book.
Yeah. I don't know what the history of that was. Was it supposed to be a spillover book? Is it like Book of Secrets and
Well, no, because there was a spillover book, which was Book of Storyteller's Secrets, and
mm,
then I guess it was kind of just the all-purpose because it's not a player's guide or storyteller's guide. It's kind of a catch-all for all of the above, and that's a trend. They did that with Kindred of the East as well.
mm. But yeah, let's start with the fairy section.
Can I just point out also,
Yep.
the Dark Ages core book did have contributions from Ian Lemke, and this one has contributions from Jackie and Nikki. And so I
Mm,
wonder if they're the ones who specifically wrote the fairy stuff. But
maybe.
anyway,
Yeah, we'll get into this. This feels a little bit different to me than the other. Not that there's a huge amount here either, but there's more. But it just feels
yeah,
different. You can tell it's been a few years later, and
yeah,
maybe different writers.
yeah. We're skipping ahead to chapter 6, where you get like a scattershot collection of materials that include golems and other stuff.
Hmm. So they have a fairies section, and
Yes. How about I read these brief opening paragraphs on page 152?
okay.
So, enchanted forests, mushroom rings, magical pools, green barrows, and stone forts. Throughout the dark medieval world, these are known border markers between the human realms and the lands of the Fae. Here, magical energy abounds, glamour rules over reality, and the good folk preside over their eternal courts. From these magical dwelling places, fairy kings and queens lead their courtiers on nightly hunts. They sweep across the land in search of mortals, or Cainites, to taunt. If their quarry gives merry chase and evades them until dawn, the capricious fae may reward her with a fairy treasure, or curse her for robbing them of the anticipated finale of their sport. The fickle fae are enigmatic and dangerous when crossed. Their passions run wild and hot. What the fae feel, they experience with bone-jarring intensity that can consume a mortal or Cainite courageous enough to interact with them. Seems legit.
Yep.
And there's descriptions of the lifestyle they lead because, you know, it's easy to get bored when you're an immortal. You need things to entertain you.
Yep.
Q
And
continuum
one thing
vibes.
this does pretty early that I caught, it sort of refers to Arcadia, where you would say the dreaming in Changeling, as opposed to, I think, meaning literal Arcadia, but it's a bit vague.
Yeah. There was something else. There was another book that we looked at which did kind of the same thing
Oh,
where
wasn't that the Fae in Ars Magica?
no, there was another one. Thoughts escape me on this Friday afternoon. It's been a
Mhm.
long week. But like that idea of there's Earth and Arcadia slash the dreaming, and before a certain point in the development of Changeling, it seems like they really presented it was kind of like there was no slow peeling away like you get with the sundering of the autumn world and the dreaming. It was like they were totally side by side until the shattering happened, and then they totally weren't. And I
Mhm.
kind of like the slow slide more, the idea of Arcadia getting farther and farther away.
Yeah. I still like Arcadia as a one place in the dreaming,
Yeah.
but for many Fae, it's not their homeland at all, which is not exactly what it says. It's sort of inconsistent there, but the she should see it as a homeland to me. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I like there being many Arcadias, one of them being on the moon,
and one of them being in middle of Greece.
and one of them being in Los Angeles County. So they talk here about the Fae having a focus on experiencing strong emotions, either vicariously, like by feeling like they're part of a family, by helping churn butter and whatnot, or more directly by just kind of pranking people or doing whatever to elicit a strong emotional reaction. They also live theatrically, setting up these elaborate dramas with mimicking the parts of humans, or sometimes kidnapping humans to take part. Most of them aren't evil or cruel or treacherous necessarily, though the unseelie can certainly be dangerous.
Hmm.
I think the two things that stand out to me here are first, you can see the threads that run through other Changeling games peeking in here, like the idea of bored immortals staging theatricals with humans. And then again, that unseelie equals evil idea is really front and center.
Yep.
And the latter of those is echoed by this little two paragraph bit that says the division, which is just
Hmm.
like Fae are sometimes seen as evil. Okay.
Yep.
There is the nice bit about some Fae just being annoyed that humans have forgotten their customs and oaths,
Hmm.
a la Dark Ages Fae. And the stories of the church have directly sort of shaped them into being more evil than they might otherwise be, kind of reinforcing some of the metaphysics we've seen elsewhere.
And we get to medieval practices and belief. I like this little section here.
Yeah.
So this is like all about what mortals in the dark medieval thought about the Fae, and then at one point has like contrast for like the truth.
Hmm. Great inspiration for echoes here,
Hmm.
like the superstitions and the customs, ways to repel them, etc.
Yep. But you can also just have it. They do those things, and then the Fae are like, "What are you doing?"
Right. What is that, salt?
Yeah.
Yeah. With like the fairy practices, the beliefs, and the truth. So the first one is about fairy wraths, where it's like, oh, everyone knows that the fairies live in pagan burial mounds. And the truth is like, well, yes and no, they can, but it's kind of
Hmm.
disconnected to the dreaming. That, I think, connects pretty easily to the main setting of Changeling.
Yep.
But then the others, especially the second one with the stealing children, like this is more about the kidnapping mytheme than
Yeah.
maybe anything
But that
else
was
we've got.
supposed. Changeling did describe that as being before the shattering, something that happened.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just we get more words about why they would do it here than I think in any
Yeah.
other Changeling the Dreaming book.
And even the one edition, first edition core book of Changeling, sort of that's what the she were
Yeah.
this kind of Changeling. So,
The emotional motivations under the surface there are really interesting, though,
hmm.
where it's talking about, like, Fae parents longing to have a child to experience what that's like.
Hmm.
And conversely, a Fae taking the place of a child to experience what it's like to grow up.
I love that kind of thing with
Yeah,
Fae.
no, it's fascinating.
It's like some very alien being that's like fascinated by regular, normal lives from our perspective.
There's bits about acknowledging help, there's bits about curses, all useful stuff.
And then we get fair folk types, which are just the original core kiths,
Except for
except for Ishu.
except for Ishu.
Hmm.
And then we get some new ones.
Yeah. So this other Fae, the first one's the Alfar, which sort of later become a house in Changeling, really.
I guess kind of, yeah. It's like if you took one part Aeson, one part Balor, one part generic She, and mixed them all
Hmm.
together. I think
Really,
that's the...
Baylor?
There's the bit about the Dark Elves having a deformity.
Oh, but those are other Fae though. Yeah, the Dark Elves. I guess. Yeah, I was thinking of the Light Elves specifically.
Oh, oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they very much echo the Norse tradition and the Norse deities in terms of like the division between them.
Yeah.
The Light Elves have artists and crafters and use elf shot and brew poet's mead. And the Dark Elves are miners and smiths and sorcerers who live underground, create treasures, etc. And despite their monikers, they aren't always co occurrent with Seelie or Unseelie, respectively. I don't know that they were really necessary, frankly. But
Yeah. Well, and then we get cottage fairies, which feels even less necessary to me
yeah,
because we already have boggins and stuff. Like, and they talked about other. It's like, okay, in addition to boggins and brownies, there's all these other things that are basically just boggins and
yeah.
brownies.
It does make a point of saying they look very different.
Hmm. But you never see them, so it's.
Right.
And then you have the Earl Conning,
Erlkönig.
one of the singular fairy.
Yes, a singular regal elf who rides through the air and is a portent of death, leading the wild hunt.
Yeah.
I like thinking of him as like the seventh seal, death. Like I know it's death, but also the idea of challenging someone to a chess game so that you won't kill them.
Yeah.
That feels very Earl Carnegie.
And then we have the Giannis? Johnny
Yes,
Games? I don't know how to.
Giannis.
Giannis. I like these ones.
These are probably
Yeah.
the most distinctive, yeah. Weaver Fae, gifted with powerful prophetic and time magic, using spinning
Yeah.
and stones for divination.
And sometimes they appear as owls.
Right, why not? I mean, they're similar to the Moire for a start, but then there's
Mhm.
somebody making a Storyteller's Vault supplement for Italy that has these, I think,
Mm.
in their incarnation as the Zana or the Zane, I think.
Hmm.
So yeah, good stuff.
And then there's the Hag, another singular.
Yep,
This one I've seen in
another
various
fortune teller.
stuff, used in other fairy stories, stuff things.
Yeah, she seems kind of like a combo of the last two, to be honest.
Yeah, but there's only one of her. Aren't you supposed to have three of them for this type of?
Yeah, well, she's potentially an aspect of the threefold goddess
Yep.
in her crone incarnation. But I do like the little notes that they have. So the stuff about like her being most powerful during winter months, we're coming up on Imbolc, and one of the
Hmm.
traditions at Imbolc is the Cailleach, the hag in Irish culture, The tradition of like the groundhog seeing its shadow is said to maybe come from the tradition that if it's raining on Imbolc, then the Caliph, the hag, she has gathered all of her firewood for the rest of the winter and she won't make it last too much longer. But if it's sunny, that means she's going out to gather more wood to make winter last longer.
Mm,
So that's like the root of the groundhog thing.
wow. I just realized you how much warmer Ireland is than here.
Yeah. Well, in the winter
It's
at
like if it was
least.
if it's raining on Imbolc here, that's climate change. So that's
Yep.
and then we have the shepherding fairies. These are interesting.
Mm. I kind of like them. I mean, they're
Yep.
very particular to the setting, but they're somewhat unlike most of the other ones we've gotten.
Yep. They're like shapeshifters that go around with herds of stuff.
Yeah. Punishing those who mistreat animals or their keepers. They
Yep.
assume responsibility for herds. It's worth noting also that each of these, or most of these at least, give a little bit of context around how they would interact with vampires specifically. So I like
Hmm.
this one because there's vampires who are like, oh, I'm going to avoid causing any trouble among the humans. I'm just going to feed from animals. And then the shepherding fairy shows up and is like, excuse me. And although they are shapeshifters, they don't generally take animal form. But speaking of shifters,
Yeah, the shifters, which are like
evil puka?
I was thinking Ethu from
Oh,
Kithbook
yeah.
Issue,
Yeah.
but also kind of tieflings from Dungeons and Dragons or Lunar Exalted or something. Like it's from Exalted. Because they'll have like something, some inhuman aspect of them, even when they're shapeshifting.
Tempting and foul all at once.
But
Yeah.
they're also the what are those horses called?
The Kelpies.
The Kelpies. I've also heard puka referred to that way, so like puka for that type of thing by people.
Well, it all kind of blends together, and this very much seems like a catch all
Yeah,
where the various types are all unified primarily by their malevolence. And I don't really know what to do with that. Like, could you even make a Seelie one of these?
yeah. But like, what is uniting them otherwise? It's kind of it's almost like it's like somebody saw the Fae, a bunch of other Fae, and made their own classifications of them. Is how it really feels to me. Like
Yeah.
these could be activities that Fae take, not types of Fae.
Yeah, I don't know. I find these uneven for sure.
Hmm.
Like of all of them, I think the Giannis are the ones that I would actually port into a game.
Yep.
Maybe the
But
Alfar.
all of these, porting any of these would require creating a new kith, basically, or something. Maybe not if they're only NPCs, but you still have to do a fair amount of work to figure out what do they do, what's the system for it, how do you like? You have to
Yeah.
create a lot.
The Giannis seem like they'd be the easiest lift
Hmm.
for that. Anyway, there's a final section on fairies and Canaanites. It points out that although they travel in different circles, sometimes vampires go looking for exotic blood, but more likely a vampire will drink from a mortal that a fae is protective of. Nevertheless, some fae are tolerant of Canaanites, believing them to be distant kin, while others feel pain in their presence, presumably the more banal ones. Malkavians being the exception to all of these rules.
Yep.
So the overall sort of like threat that the Fae have is again left very open ended, but I suppose that befits storyteller antagonists.
Yep.
Um, I feel like this would give me enough to adapt Changeling the Dreaming for a crossover game into
Hmm.
Vampire. Like if there were a Vampire Dark Ages game where somebody wanted to play a Changeling, I feel like I could
Yep.
do it using all this.
Although most of that's the core book, I think, not the companion section.
Yeah, that's true. This just kind of gives more options
Hmm.
in various ways and more story hooks and ideas, which is also welcome. So we're focusing on the second half of chapter 6, which is very specific. I will say this is one of my favorite Dark Ages books because it is just full of stuff, and a
Hmm.
lot of it is kind of broad spectrum useful, I would say. Starting with maybe chapter 1.
Yeah. So additional combat rules. A lot of this sort of feels a little bit like World of Darkness combat, but you have like extra stuff like new maneuvers, okay, and then things about doing mounted combat stuff that could be relevant in Changeling too.
Mhm. I
Um,
love these jousting rules.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, if you want to have a joust, here's your rules. It tells you about the actual the protocols of it, where it's like the horses begin on opposite sides of a partition and then charge at each other. each jouster rolls dexterity plus melee to land a blow, but then it's like
Hmm.
you oppose strength plus melee against stamina plus ride to unhorse your foe. Like it's all of the little variations
Yeah.
that you would
And this is
see.
still back when they were like really big on let's mix and match attributes and abilities
Yep.
for specific stuff, which I like better actually a lot of the
Me
time.
too. Give
Yeah.
me more appearance rolls.
Like sometimes it would get silly, but like,
Well, that's the pastime, isn't
yeah.
it? Like trying to get people to come up with what would you actually roll appearance plus occult for. So
Stamina plus.
stamina plus ride is not one that I expect a human to make very often.
Although stamina plus awareness, that's the one I'm trying
Oh, yeah.
to.
Yeah, this is also it. I don't know if you brought these jousting rules into the modern setting. The ride skill is not standard on the C20 character sheet, so
Yeah, but as long as you have the ability that covers riding, which if you're going to have
that's true.
horseback riding, you need some kind of ability for it.
Presumably, animal can would.
I thought athletics, but who knows?
Eh, I don't know. You're not really. You're just kind of getting the horse where
Drive.
you want to.
Just
Well, yeah.
drive.
There's also some. There's a table for damage on being trampled by various things, which I
Yep.
like. Very difficult to avoid being trampled by a mob.
Yep. And then there's another section. The sieges, I don't think is going to be too useful in something gone very strange in your changeling game.
Love it. I think there could be sieges in the Dreamings. We get all those notes about like the
Yeah,
fields behind being taken over.
but a lot of this is kind of if you get more fantastic powers from things, it kind of changes how sieges work. But yeah,
Yeah,
if you're in the fields behind, is like somebody you're worrying about. You're protecting your source of water. That
I
feels a little
mean,
bit.
you still got to drink something, right?
Yeah.
So then, what about these mass combat rules?
So this has mass combat rules. Changing the Dreaming had mass combat rules in War and Concordia. These are doing different things, kind of. But one big difference is when usually somebody says the mass combat rules in War and Concordia, they're usually talking about like the rules for your characters in command of some number of troops and
Hmm.
you're doing a battlefield thing. There's none of that in this book. There's rules for if you find yourself in a mass combat, like a big battle that lasts hours, here's some rules to streamline it instead of like roll like doing the standard combat system for everything. But there's no like commanding troops or anything like that. There's you get your actions for what you're doing and maybe you could fight heroically or something. But it's really you're not dealing with like ordering other people or things like that.
Would you say that one set complements the other?
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't really I'd have to look to see how well they fit together. And a lot of these rules are vampires in mass combat, which
Sure.
I don't think your changeling's going to get staked by accident by a axe handle or something. But
Or go for the bite attack, unless you're a red
yeah,
cap. But I remember in War and Concordia, there was the whole like the fractions of kiths. Like what was it? You know, each boggin is 3/10 of a troop, or like
yeah,
whatever it
yeah. It
was.
doesn't have that kind of thing because you're not. War Concordia had rules for your army or
Right,
small battle group or whatever, like rules for them. Vampire Darkness doesn't have that. It's rules for your character is in a combat.
right. Free for all melee, kind of.
Yeah, or it could be an organized combat, but you're still like you're not giving orders. You're fighting. So
Yeah. Which, I mean, thinking about it is something which I would like to see more developed for Changeling. You know,
yeah.
like all of these, it is true that I would say 70% of the words in this section are like how to use your disciplines in combat in creative and
Hmm.
interesting ways. And I mean, thinking about using arts in creative and interesting ways in the middle of a free for all is interesting to consider.
Yeah. But the actual like there was mass combat description in War and Concordia, but the actual like rules that I'm contrasting here are like 3 to 4 pages or 3 and a bit pages worth
Hmm,
of that, and then there's a lot of other stuff about in battle, right? And the changeling ones like I've seen like Exalted has stuff like that. I think they might be based on a D&D supplement I read from that came out in the 80s or something. But yeah, Vampire the Director does not have actual. It's a you are in a combat, not here are the rules for
right.
wargaming.
Also, what is this picture on page 46?
There's a lot of that in Vampire: The Dark Ages, the original edition too. Like the
It's true. The
core
fish
book.
milk.
Yes, can we have like a picture in the show notes of that vampire with the fish and the draining blood into a goblet?
This is a thing that can happen.
Okay.
Yes. So that's the combat rules on page 49. At the end of the chapter is a nice little sidebar that kind of sums it all up neatly, and
Hmm.
maybe use it as you will.
Yeah, I'm not sure about these rules too because it's like clunky
Yeah.
to try to use.
I don't know. I'd have to sit with these. And
I never played with them, so I don't know.
no, me neither. I eschew combat. So then chapter 2 is all about Cainite morality, which doesn't really have any bearing on Changeling.
Come on, you shouldn't be Road of the Fae, like the Road of Seelie and Road of Unseelie, and then you have vampires
Well,
following that.
presumably, if you wanted to introduce morality into Changeling that was more complicated than
Yeah.
Seelie and Unseelie, I think this could actually give you some interesting inspirations or like
Hmm.
philosophies within those courts.
Yep.
But I mean, it would be so much to try and like hash it out.
Yeah, and I honestly like the way the morality system works. I'm not really a
Yeah.
fan of on a fun like just for role playing games, but
Well, regardless, there's the road of chivalry and the road of paradox, and there's your Seelie and Unseelie right there.
yep. And then we have chapter 3, Bloodlines, starting with the Lost. Is that a forerunner of Changing the Lost?
I think it's just the header for yeah. Um, so there's three of these, which the Laban, the Lamia, and the Salubri. But then there's also the Lianan, not the Lianan, but the Lianan. Totally different.
Yep.
So yeah, the name is similar. These are vampires that have kind of a blood priestess vibe.
Hmm.
They're an offshoot of the gangrel, seemingly. They live in the pagan fringes of Europe, and they claim to descend from the vampiric figure of the crone. They're dying out quickly in the face of the Inquisition, and everyone seems to hate them, including the Fae.
So were they
So,
invented here,
yes,
or was this like a thing Vampire talked about? Okay.
this is their first appearance.
Yep.
I do wonder. So later in the modern game, we have the Aramanes, who I believe
Hmm.
came before the Lianan because they were in Storyteller's Handbook to the Sabbat. And you can kind of see some connective tissue. Because one of the interesting things about Dark Ages is, or this incarnation of Dark Ages, is that it gives all of these sort of hints about the future. So the bloodlines have destiny as one of their write up
Hmm.
pieces. And it tells you, here's what happened to this bloodline.
Yep.
So for the Lianan, it's they were exterminated as Christianity overran Europe. But then it says rumors persist that the Sabbat, or perhaps the mysterious Eastern vampires, make use of a discipline similar to Ogham, but involving the use of tattoos or ideographs. I don't recall a discipline like that,
Hmm.
but the Aramanes did have Spiritus, which had like some vague tilts at similar stuff of like, connections to the spirit world, etc.
So
So
there's something I've done with this game. Also has another supplement called Clan Book Bali,
yes.
and there's something I've done with the stuff in there because there's the Bali in Vampire the Masquerade, like the modern one, and then they had like this other kind of Bali in that book. I'm
Mhm.
getting somewhere for changing here, and I've actually like had that old kind. The whole thing about vampires is they can last in torpor, and as long as they're not disturbed, they can be there for thousands of years.
Mhm.
Right? So you can have, even if say, oh, they've all been wiped out. Yeah, all the active ones have been, but in your chronicle, you could have one show up. Probably not when your player character is really asking to play one, but maybe as an interesting NPC kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like you can have that, and you could. This would work. The Leonin would work like that too. You could definitely have like one Leonin or a group of Leonin or something that something happened to them. They went into torpor, and they've now been woken up in your chronicle. If you wanted to bring them in, so in a modern game, you can still do that totally.
Yeah. And even though the Fae dislike them, they have a habit of draining sacred sites dry, including the Fae's
Yeah.
glamour rich places. I could see certain Unseelie allying with them in desperation to like stave off the shattering, believing that combating Christianity will help stem the tide, that kind of
Hmm.
thing. Or just House Leon and Sheep taking umbrage that their name has been appropriated.
But something started draining a freehold. That's a pretty straightforward plot hook.
Yeah. And in terms of like vibe, in terms of how they present, they're like a throwback to all the worst propaganda about druidry with like
Hmm.
human sacrifice and corrupting the
Yeah,
land.
their weaknesses are like easy to detect with things that can detect stuff, and also they're bad at resisting faith magic, including
Yeah,
pagan faith magic. So like they're supposed to be the evil thing in general, not just if that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. So among their powers, if we move on to chapter 4, where we get a whole bunch of vampiric disciplines, we have their discipline of Ogham, named after the ancient Irish spelling system for some reason.
Well, they're supposed to be runic glyphs. Those aren't runes. They should be doing Ogham writing, not runes.
Right?
Yeah, that would be cool. Side thing, Ogham is the only thing in Unicode that has a non-white space.
Really?
Because yes, because you need to write down spaces, but Ogham's got that line all the way through it.
Yeah.
So the actual like character encoding says you need that line there. Like it's a different kind of character, but it's supposed to be treated like a space in terms of formatting and stuff.
Nice. Well, briefly, the 6 powers of Ogham that we get. First is Consecrate the Grove. By bleeding onto the earth, the vampire awakens earth spirits to attack those whom she designates. Level 2 is Crimson Woad. The vampire inscribes her body with runes to ignore wound penalties and to do wrathful
Hmm.
strikes, which are just fancy attacks. Inscribe the Curse allows the vampire to curse a foe by writing their true name on her body. Level 4, Moon and Sun. The vampire can, depending if they inscribe the Moon rune or the Sun rune on themselves, they can gain a die bonus or sunlight resistance for an unspecified length of time, I noticed. I read this twice,
Mm.
carefully. As far as I know, it just lasts forever, but. Level 5 is Dragon Lines. This is what allows them to suck mystic sites dry, including freeholds.
What do they do with it? I'm a little bit confused with the sucking they do. They get extra dice or something, or
Yeah. So they get a dice pool that it's like a use it one and done kind of thing.
hmm.
So like you have this pool of dice that you can use at some point in the future and then it's gone.
Yeah,
So understandably annoying some other supernaturals. And it like blights the land around the site if it's completely drained.
yeah.
Lastly, Inscribe the Forgotten Names lets them summon a mythic beast unspecified. So you can get a bygone in there.
The first 5, if you were to do alternative cantrips for arts, sort of like how Wraith Arcana have that, this feels like this could be some naming inspiration here.
Mhm.
Most of these powers.
Yeah, I like it. Power of writing.
Mhm.
And in terms of other like crossover opportunities, I like the idea of a Fae and a Leonin sparring using Earth spirits. Imagine using Primal versus Ogham and just like attacking each other using a grove in some way.
Mhm.
Naming to sidestep a curse that a Leonin has laid on somebody, summoning I don't know, a dragon or a unicorn, sucking a freehold dry. Like a lot of hooks are possible here. Within Vampire, it's a very scattershot collection of blood magic. Like there's not
Yeah,
much of a unifying theme. But
no. Besides, you write something
yeah, exactly.
in blood.
Spend some blood points.
Yeah, spend some blood points writing a thing or something, and then I don't even think you're writing always. Yeah. Although I still feel like naming 5 when you have these kind of powers kicking around. One use of naming 5 that doesn't get brought up is you could maybe just use it to change someone's true name so they can't be targeted by other true name magic.
There you go.
Yeah, it's like this is inconsequential. You now have a slightly different shade of brown hair, but your true names. It's now a different true name. All your true name stuff's done, broken.
Surprisingly effective sometimes.
Hmm.
There's other disciplines in this chapter that are like fun and interesting. I don't know how many of them are Fey relevant, except for maybe Chemistry 8 Fantasy World, which allows you to create an illusory world in another being's mind. Given the connections we've had before between chemistry and the dreaming, I wonder if this basically lets them make a dream realm.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. And there's other stuff too that's fun and interesting.
Hmm.
Then we get chapter 5 Faith. So bouncing back to the Dark Ages core book for a second, I don't know, did we ever actually get the true faith mechanic in a Changeling core book? I don't recall seeing that.
No, we got well, kind of. We don't get the true faith mechanic. We get rules about it in like something like Book of Storyteller's Secrets or something, like
Yeah.
how it affects Fae, but not. I don't think we get full on rules for
Yeah, like this is what happens at each level kind of thing.
it. Hmm.
So, very briefly in the core book, well, it goes through it extensively, but very briefly, uh, if you have dots in the trait True Faith, Level 1 lets you ward off vampires. Level 2 makes you immune to dominate. Level 3 lets you sense vampires. Level 4 makes you immune to presence and obfuscate or being turned into a ghoul. And level 5 is you cause vampires to be filled with self-loathing and even physical pain. Given this setting and given the kind of like equation of the Fae with demons, etc., I don't know if I would say true faith in modern times would have the same impact because belief in fairies is much less in the modern setting. But I
Mm-hmm.
would say in the medieval times it would probably apply to both.
Mm-hmm. I think it could work as like as defending against something. I think true faith could work.
Yeah. And it's true faith, not just faith.
Yeah,
Capital F faith.
capital T true.
Yeah. They also go into relics and holy water and holy ground and kind of like the permutations of faith, inquisitors and exorcists. Weirdly, exorcists, it says they can expel vampires and ghosts and demons and whatnot, but Fae aren't mentioned. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm. There is a from the revised era, the Dark Ages Inquisitor book. That gets way more into that kind of
I
thing.
should think.
And it's almost like pre-Hunter the Reckoning Hunters.
Yeah,
From revised era Hunter the Reckoning, not H5. Anyway.
yeah. So back to the companion briefly.
Mm-hmm.
The expansions we get on this are there's more specific stuff around holy ground, and this is more broad.
Mm-hmm.
So level 1, for example, says any supernatural creature attempting to trespass upon holy ground at level 1 must make a willpower roll difficulty 8 to proceed. So that's not just vampires. Level 2 says that certain disciplines or similar powers possessed by other awakened creatures fail to work.
Mm-hmm. That would include Sovereign for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. This isn't your house, she. This is Jesus' house.
Yep.
Level 3, all within the area sense something unnatural whenever a vampire or infernal creature attempts to enter. Level 4, no disciplines that affect anyone other than the being using them may be employed within an area this holy. And then level 5 is like you have to spend willpower and keep spending it to enter and remain there.
If you were doing like earlier medieval or something like that, it's not faith and true faith and holy ground wouldn't just be limited to Christianity or Islam or something, right?
I don't think it's even like that in here. They
Yeah.
talk about pagan capital F faith,
Yeah. There's just less communities of it, and it's
and they look different.
yeah.
So then later on in this chapter, we get paganism, which is loosely defined, very, I'm going to call this a retrospective perspective or something.
Is that the bit where the pagans call themselves Wiccans according to this book in the medieval period?
Yeah. Yeah, for example, there's that. So it's described, paganism is described as still being present in the British Isles, France, Brittany in particular, Scandinavia, the Baltic region, which is probably the most historically accurate.
Yeah. By this point, there was the I don't think the Crusades that tried to.
They were underway.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lithuania wasn't till like 1380 something or 1400.
Yeah.
Also, Finland and Lapland, Russia and the Balkans. Most of these geographic sections are kind of around like when Christianity arrived, the deities and myths of each place. Then there's a section called the Old
You
Religion.
missed the Baba Yaga.
Yeah, there's a Baba Yaga sidebar. That's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Old Religion. It focuses on how the gods born of nature are like. It keeps making this distinction between the gods and the religion born of nature and the material world and the here and now versus the Christianity focus on the afterlife, focus on the spirit, etc. And I mean,
I don't know. There's a lot of like Norse paganism and Greek pagan. Like those are not necessarily all
no,
natural
no, I'm
world either.
saying that's what they're saying.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I don't buy it. I think I will agree that pagan religions do tend to be more attentive to the natural cycles than Christianity is.
In
But
this period.
in this period, yes.
Yeah. Rome, for instance, before it became Christian, I would not call it that at all.
No,
But
of course.
any more than Christianity is. But like,
Yeah. Really, it points to the etymology of the word pagan as just meaning rural. So,
hmm yeah, folk religions.
yeah, being in tune with the natural world.
In the Christian thing, did it get into like Christian folk stuff? Because there was a ton of that back then. Like it was not.
It does.
You get to places like we're Christian. Here's our priest, and you're like, what are you doing?
I don't know that it does in this chapter, but
Yeah.
there's also in the Dark Ages setting, there's a specific knowledge called hearth wisdom that's all around that sort of
Yep.
stuff. So I think in the core book there might be more about it.
Yep.
In any case, more about paganism here. They talk about the sort of pagan virtues of loyalty, bravery, endurance, passion. A lot of this actually echoes the Pendragon role playing game,
Mm.
interestingly. There are rituals around battle and childbirth and the harvest, divination through natural means, prayers to the gods for prosperity and luck, sacrifices and holy places, the symbology of different elements, the emphasis on equal or near equal status given to women, and the through line to Wicca and the witch cult idea. Just kind of leave that where it is, I think.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean it's thorough. I'll give it that, and it would certainly add context, I would say, to how the Fae would behave and perceive mortals at this time. If you were going to use this setting, I wanted to be like, okay, the Fae are not going to hang out with the banal priests and their followers who are like inflicting banality on them every time they brandish a cross. So who are they going to hang out with? Here you go. Not very historically accurate, maybe, but eh,
Yeah. That's a weird take on banality, but that's a whole other.
yeah. And even though much of this is presented in relation to vampires, there are bits that could function for the Fae. Like on page 136, there's a pagan cult merit. Certainly, there could be a Fae with one of those.
Yep.
There are these pagan relics on the next page: the Imbolc candle, the Lunasa coin, the Samhain bread, the May crown. Awesome.
Although it's talking about all about Europe and like mainland Europe, and then it gives a bunch of British and Irish
Well, yeah, I mean,
things.
I think they kind of worked with the sources they had available. Like,
Yeah.
so Baltic paganism is one of the most poorly described European mythological traditions,
Yep.
and yet it's a really rich one. We just don't have much
Yeah.
stuff about it.
It's the one of them where maybe you could argue there's an unbroken link, or if there is a broken link, it was like a generation or two just of documented stuff. But
Yeah. So that's that bit. Chapter 7 is all about infernalism, which maybe see the Book of Grimmere coming eventually for the
yeah.
C30 project.
I find infernalism stuff fun, but
It's fun and interesting. I don't know that it's
yeah.
particularly changeling more than anything else.
Oh, appendix has stats for all sorts of animals. If you want to
Yay!
name your puka, lion, European. What? Okay.
But there are notes.
Yeah.
They are occasionally found in desolate regions. So
Okay.
I don't know that that's actually true outside of this setting, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's the companion, and a mighty book it be. I would certainly return to this book if I were to run. I mean, honestly, even running a Dark Ages Fae setting, I think this gives you more about mortal perspective possibilities than Dark Ages
Hmm.
Fae does.
Yeah. I don't know if you're gonna run Dark Ages Fame, maybe read this. It's
Yeah.
probably going to be very helpful. I think. Yeah.
And I say that not really knowing much about in the Dark Ages Revised line, because Dark Ages Revised I didn't really get
Hmm.
into.
I have several books from it, but I haven't finished reading most of them.
Yeah.
So I read the Dark Ages Mage and stuff, but I haven't. I have some like other.
Did that have stuff about human perspectives on the supernatural?
Yeah, and on the and Mage perspectives on the Fae that are more like this book than Dark Ages Fae.
Ah, maybe we should add that to our list.
Maybe, but we're talking like it was like a
No.
page maybe or something.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the thing is that I mean, we kind of put a poll in the Discord about this to like determine which books to read, and one of the reasons I wanted to focus on these was because there is actually a significant number of pages in both of them. More than I would say most non-Dark Ages books get into the Fae outside of Changeling.
Hmm.
So, it's nice that they were thinking about it. But speaking of Discord,
Yeah, you could join our Discord and chat with us at discord.me/CTP. You can go to our website, Changeling the Podcast. We're on various social media sites that are in flux right now, but we're definitely on Mastodon, Changeling Pod at dice.camp right now. You can send us an email. What is our email, Puka?
podcast at changelingthepodcast.com.
Yeah, that's so hard to remember. And we have a YouTube channel, Changeling the Podcast, as well as a Patreon if you want to come and chip in. Somebody just joined recently.
Links to all of these will be in the show notes to this episode. Was that too abrupt of an outro? I felt like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I
Discord
missed.
came up and I seized the opportunity. Was
No.
there anything
Oh,
else you
okay.
needed to say?
No, I think that's it.
Yay,
We're not
Dark
really
Ages.
reviewing the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry for anyone who thought this was going to be like a deep read through of 500 pages of Dark Ages vampire content, but you
No.
know.
And there's a lot of other Dark Ages vampire content out there.
But some of it is so good.
Yep. And some of it is so. I don't know where I put the fish milk one. I'm glad it exists, but.
Right on. All right then. Well,
And once again, I'm Josh.
I be that puka.
Yeah. And if you see someone writing your full legal name on their forehead in blood, run.
It's good. It's good advice regardless. But merry meet and merry part and merry Tyler Moore. Sometimes it can seem difficult to transpose character concepts from modern iterations of a game setting to historical ones like Dark Ages, but Changeling the podcast encourages you to go with your first instinct, no matter how ridiculous. One tried and true method is to pair the name of the kith you're playing with a setting-appropriate occupation that may or may not have existed. So whether you draft a redcap whipping boy, a bog and marley woman, a slua alnager, a puka ratcatcher, a selkie ragpicker, a clericon mendicant, a satyr groom of the stool, a pisky tavern wench, a troll luparius, a knocker spurrier, a she anchoress, or an ishu piss prophet, have confidence that there will be a place for your would-be protagonist in mortal and fey society alike. Of course, you can join our Discord community at www.discord.me/ctp to receive some bespoke advice about which of these or other professions your character would be most suited to. Podcast-adjacent services like this are available thanks to our patrons, who include Derek, Dorcatus, Elleris, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razcaboose, Sandshaker, Sija, Simon Strand, and Victor Torrey. You too can support our show and receive a shout-out at the end of each episode by signing up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. We also appreciate reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or you can hire a town crier to tell as many passersby as possible. Until next time, be sure to muck out the garderobe and read all the wattles, learn a troubadour tune or three, watch out for rat fleas, and keep on dreaming.